Donald Trump has lost the biggest revenge case that he has ever brought against his famed opponent, former FBI Director James Comey. The case has been completely tossed, and Trump lost his effort to install a temp, a temporary prosecutor, to bring the case. They were using a loophole they thought might get around the problems that were basically defective in the evidence. This breakdown covers the breaking news. I just got the actual filing dealing this blow to Trump. He also lost a similar case in the same district against Attorney General of New York, Letitia James. I'm Ari Melber. This is a YouTube breakdown. You can always subscribe for these sort of longer reporting and legal pieces. What I'm going to do right now is go through this actual case. Rarely do you get something that is this strong a rebuke of the larger effort to change the Justice Department as we know it in this country, or at least since the Nixon era, and make it a place for political or revenge prosecutions. That is failing, and that's why this ruling matters more than just the Comey case itself, although some of these other cases will probably continue. So I'm going to do that breakdown. I'm also going to discuss the wider context of Donald Trump losing Republicans in the Congress, the Epstein fallout. So that's coming up. But right now, let's talk about what this is. It's a ruling that grants a motion to dismiss the indictment. There are two of them, and the Comey case is basically over, and I'll explain why. And the James case could be more likely refiled. What this is about, big picture, and then I'm going to read from it, is whether the guardrails on prosecutions hold. If you go all the way back to the founding and the abuses of the king, habeas corpus, the first test of a government's potential abuse of citizens is something that it has the power to do, but it has to do it the right way, and that is to prosecute, imprison, detain people. And a country or a system that does that unfairly or does that abusively won't be a real democracy as we understand it. So what's in here is, first, the Constitution's actual appointment clause. That may sound a little technical, but I'll explain to you in plain English why that matters, because the founders understood there would be these risks. They just dealt with a king that imprisoned and detained people. They viewed it as completely abusively. But that when you try to separate the powers, we hear a lot about that, executive, judicial, legislative, there will be, of course, tests of that. There will be efforts. The founders in the Constitution thought about that. And so to explain this, the massive power the prosecutors have was supposed to be checked by the Senate, and anyone who becomes a prosecutor has to get Senate confirmation. But sometimes there are vacancies. Sometimes there are times where the Senate hasn't confirmed them yet. And so there is a process to put in a temp. That's what this is about. And the Trump administration had already tried to bring a case against Comey with a Trump-appointed prosecutor who said the evidence didn't hold. Then they installed someone you may have heard briefly about, Lindsay Halligan. She was effectively fired by the court today, saying her whole appointment is invalid. And so they go through this in the case. I'm going to read a couple key parts that are understandable. In September, over this and other controversies, the Trump picks, Siebert, resigned in September because he was under this pressure and he didn't feel he could honestly bring the case against Comey. The next day, Trump posted what is now believed to be an attempt at a private message to Pam Bondi. That was a mistake he made. He deleted the post. It addressed her as Pam and talked about wanting to get these cases going. To be clear, the judge is citing that in the ruling against Trump as part of the problems that he made, of his own making, the evidence against him. Then there's a whole section here where the judge reviews the back and forth transcript of the unusual grand jury proceedings where they couldn't get anyone in DOJ to sign on to Comey. So Halligan, who they installed for the old guy mentioned, was alone in filing the Comey case. And reading from the case, the judge today says Halligan determined the grand jury transcript reflects the extent of her appearance before the grand jury, and there was no extra presentation, etc. So they're basically saying she did what she did, she's the only one, but the judge finds that she, as the only one, that means there's no one else to hang the indictment on. There's no other authority. And then, without any other authority, the question is simply whether she was validly appointed. This gets into the details where the Constitution says you need a validly appointed officer. And the appointments rules say that, like I mentioned, if you need a temp, the president can put in a temp once for about 120 days. After that, they didn't want to let, the system is not supposed to just let the executive abuse the temp power and never have to go back to the Senate. So while it all sounds a little wonky, I think most people don't give a lot of thought to how this all works when somebody's vacant. They tried to use this loophole and put in a second temp. And the judge is saying, no, this person's not even validly bringing this case. And that's why both the Comey and James cases were tossed, because they both came out of this district. I'm going to read now from, this is page 17. I just skipped a lot of stuff that I'm paraphrasing. And the judge rules and notes, the Attorney General's authority to appoint this temp lasts for 120 days. That's it. If the position is vacant at the end of that period, quote, the exclusive authority to make further appointments, temps, under the law, quote, shifts to the district court. In other words, this has been thought through. And while Trump has had a lot of hires who clearly want to get around the rules and the law, this one is not easy to get around because they tried to make it very clear. Yes, you get a grace period. That's just reasonable. But after the grace period, you either play by the rules, you put forward your next prosecutor to the Senate, which then has authority to make sure through advising consent that this person is valid. And by the way, a lot of Trump's big appointments have sailed through the Senate under Republicans just fine, but you can't loophole around that. And then the judge quotes from a 1995 decision, which shows that these things are supposed to work by precedent, because it's not like this is the first time any president or politician has thought, can I get around this? I want my own people in there. Or, oh, my own people, remember, it was Siebert was a Trump person, won't do what I want? Fine. Put in another person. You can go all the way back to the Saturday Night Massacre under Nixon for examples where trying to do things that are unlawful, abuse of power, or illegal, and just swapping in new people isn't supposed to work. There's supposed to be guardrails. So the judge notes that this rule serves as, quote, a bulwark against one branch aggrandizing its power at the expense of another, and quotes the Supreme Court from '95. And that's what this comes down to. If you remember in the first term, a lot of this was loud but sloppy. The travel ban was quickly blocked. Trump had other officials who blocked him. Even by the end of the first term, when he was trying to play games around the vote, Bill Barr blocked him, put out a memo saying the DOJ does not change election outcomes, duh. And he ultimately resigned, leaving an interim AG, because he clearly didn't want to continue on what looked like the dead-end case and ultimately turned into Jan 6th. So what this ruling says is the temp prosecutor's out. The case she brought against James Comey and Letitia James, a couple James around here, are both out. And in the Comey case, as I'll explain, they already were up against a deadline called the statute of limitations, and there was all of these games they played to try to get it in time. So now that the Halligan is out, they could technically try to bring this case again, but they've blown through that deadline. So legally, if none of this is overturned in the higher courts, game over. That matters because remember, James Comey is one of the biggest targets Trump had. He's demanded this for many years, and this sets a line against that effort. I guess they could try on other charges, but that would also feed against them and feed the Comey defense of selective prosecution if you keep jumping around to different places to bring these charges. The way the court rules it, if you're curious, says Halligan's original appointment was invalid. The Attorney General's attempt, that's Pam Bondi, to, quote, retroactively bestow a special attorney status on her was ineffective. That's something I didn't even speak to. It all gets weedsy, where the AG was trying to save her bacon. It didn't work. This is dismissal without prejudice. That means they could technically try to bring it again, and that you could see that with James if they can find people to sign on to it and bring it, because the deadline is for Comey, not for AG James. The way it looks when you see the conclusion on this kind of thing is very straightforward. Halligan must dismiss the indictment is dismissed without prejudice. Comey returns to the status occupied before being indicted. So as of this moment, legally in America, James Comey is no longer indicted. Trump lost that effort. He goes back to normal. And the conclusion piece, it's got my highlighting, but you'll see it like this, just says in bullet form what the judge is doing. One, Halligan, the appointment of Halligan as U.S. Attorney violated the law and the Constitution. Two, and this is the big loss, all actions flowing from her defective appointment, including Comey's indictment, were unlawful exercises of executive power and are set aside. And that uses legal language. The judge says hereby set aside. So unless a higher appeals court does something else, that's the end of that. 3, she rejects AG Bondi, trying to clean it up. I mentioned that. 4, Mr. Comey's motion to dismiss the indictment is granted. 5, the indictment is dismissed without prejudice. As I explained, that means technically, if they hadn't blown the deadline, you could refile it. And then it notes, and this is important because it's another Trump loss in terms of trying to abuse power, as of today, the power to appoint the replacement, the temp for that district, pursuant to the law, she names the law, quote, during this vacancy, lies with the district court until a U.S. attorney is nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, end quote. It's a lot of details. The core point at the end is they lost these 2 cases. They lost their temp prosecutor, so the effort to use that loophole. And, in case anyone's confused, they have taken, Trump lost, and so the court is taking that power of this appointment and putting it back to judges. And we would never expect any competent judge to appoint someone as inexperienced as Ms. Halligan or appoint a partisan political loyalist. So all of that is a loss, and that's the new status quo. Trump now has to deal with this. They can appeal it, which I think, based on the evidence here, they'd be likely to lose. It's very clear that you can't just run temps forever, or other administrations might have done it. Temps all the way down, if you want a Stephen Hawking's reference. And so he either has to accept the loss, go to the Senate, put up another name, or, again, just lose power in that district, lose that appointment power, and the judges will now put in a person who's probably more of a nonpartisan or career person, and that'll be it. The wider point I mentioned I want to get to with Epstein, I'm just looking at a note, is think about what's just happened in the past 3 weeks alone. The Trump DOJ just lost this case and the AG James case. Trump lost his bid to stop the Epstein files vote and lost every Republican in the Senate and most in the House on that point. Trump also lost the bid to stop the release of the 20,000 emails, which continue to make news and headaches for him and Bannon and others. That was another loss. That's kind of the beginning of the Epstein files rollout, essentially. MTG resigned, and the Republicans lost the 2025 elections, all within the last 3 weeks. So I just went through a lot of the substantive details. The courts are supposed to rule just on the facts. But the wider climate is changing. And while people tend to feel sometimes like, oh, the president's in charge and the other branches sort of react, and obviously Trump has pushed the limits to make it that way quite functionally, that doesn't mean that there isn't reaction to the action. And what we're seeing, sometimes very clearly, because this case really was probably doomed to begin with on the law, and we've been reporting that, but the wider climate that judges in Congress operate in is this extreme, often rejected, unpopular, increasingly lame duck president. And so when there are close calls, right, when a case is easy, it might not even go to the court, let alone the Supreme Court. But when there are close calls, and a lot of political science and historians have covered this, it's understandable that the dynamics around the branches matter. For Congress, of course they matter. These people are up for election. And for the courts, they have lifetime tenure, but they look at what's happening. They can feel it in the temperature. And the temperature has swiftly turned against Trump in these 3 weeks. If you go back a month or two, you have the Jimmy Kimmel debacle, the free speech debacle. Remember, there were Republicans vocally against that. There wasn't a vote to be had, but Republicans like Ted Cruz and conservative voices did criticize that obvious unconstitutional censorship. Had they actually gotten Kimmel off the air with government pressure, it could have become a court case. It could go all the way to the Supreme Court. First Amendment prohibits the government from doing that. But we didn't even get that far. They lost earlier. And so you take it together, and it's not that, oh, Trump's on the run, Trump is done, Mueller flashbacks, because those involve predictions about what's going to happen. I try to avoid that. But what you're seeing in a very clear way that you can count the Epstein files loss. You can count the votes on that. You can count all the court cases and the wider sort of ending of this. And it's a long ways from the early period when Trump seemed ascendant, people were afraid, law firms were cutting deals, Elon Musk was running around saying he was going to rewire government. Now he's fighting with Trump. He predicted, by the way, Trump was in the Epstein files. His so-called Doge project has been shut down early. The thing that was going to cut government itself got cut. So a lot can change fast. Obviously, that goes in both directions. Things could swing back towards the Republicans based on external events or other activities. But when you cover government, you have to have some eye on politics. And the politics are moving against Trump. That might have been the simplest or the most exciting part. Saved it to the end because I wanted to really walk through this ruling with you. But it's a full rebuke of Trump's revenge efforts. And the final point, you can always subscribe if you're interested in these breakdowns, is if the revenge efforts were working better, they might distort the very democratic process that we're in, because people then wouldn't just look to the normal tools like the law or the votes. Some people would be cowed, would be afraid, would think they would end up in jail. So there is a connective tissue here between the courts upholding the rule of law and thereby also defanging, taking a tool away from a government that wants to be Nixon or worse, that wants to threaten people to do that which they otherwise wouldn't do in a free society. So it all comes together that way. Send me your questions and comments and stay informed.